Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Muriello with Pasadena Humane. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Preparing to Say Goodbye, Anticipating Pet Loss. With us today is Sandra Grossman, co-founder of PetLoss Partners. Hi, Sandra.
Hi.
We're so excited to have you here with us today to talk about this really important topic. Sandra's put together an amazing presentation for everyone. And before I turn it over to her and before she gets started, I do want to share with you a few webinar reminders. So bear with me while I switch screens to my quick PowerPoint. All right. So for this webinar, you are all automatically muted, so we won't be able to hear you, but you should be able to hear us and see us. So you're either going to see our screens or see Sandra and I at different times throughout this presentation, and we cannot see you. So if you're curled up with your pet in your jammies, no problem. We want to ask that you save your questions for the end of the presentation, and that's because we're reserving about 15 minutes for a Q&A. So if you want to write your questions down in the meantime, that would be wonderful, and we're going to tell you how you can share those questions. So those questions you're going to submit using the chat box. So you'll see on the left where the green check mark is, you're going to submit your questions in that little box where it says enter a question for staff. That's the appropriate way to submit a question. We're going to ask that you not raise your hand. On the right, you'll see that little hand icon image. That's only if we're using the audio feature for the audience, and which we're not going to be using for the GoToWebinar this broadcast. So please be sure to submit any questions in the chat box and don't raise your hand. Just so you know, only I will be able to see the questions that you submit in the chat. So you can ask whatever you like, only I will see them. And as time permits, I'll go ahead and get those questions over to Sandra during the Q&A. We also want to remind you that if for some reason you need to leave during the live broadcast, you're going to be able to watch this webinar recording anytime, because tomorrow afternoon you'll receive an email with a link to this recording. So anyone who registered but cannot attend the live broadcast or needs to leave early will receive the recording tomorrow. We also want to remind you of a couple free webinars we have coming up in July. On July 8th, we have Pet Emergencies Summer Edition with Pasadena Humane Veterinarian, Dr. Christina Tan. And then on July 15th, we have Encountering Wildlife Emergencies. So that's about what to do and what not to do if you encounter injured wildlife. And that is going to be presented by Pasadena Humane Veterinarian, Dr. Maria Pierdick. So you can register for any of those free webinars at pasadenahumane.org/workshops. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sandra Grossman. Just give me a minute to switch screens.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I've really been looking forward to being able to come here and share this information with you all. My passion and really my life's work is in this area of pet loss and anticipatory grief, and I really believe that having this information is so important for any pet parents who are dealing with either a young pet or a pet that may be getting to age, or a pet who is in some kind of stage of a disease and just needs information to be able to care for them. I'm going to share a little bit more about how and why I do this, but before I do, I want to frame what we're going to be talking about today. So when we talk about anticipatory grief, anticipatory bereavement, it's really that feeling that we get inside when you may look at your dog that was once this little puppy running all over the place, and now notice that his muzzle is more gray than black. Or maybe it's the cat that you've had for 13 years that once used to climb all over everything and knock everything down, and now she's struggling just to be able to jump up on the windowsill. Or unfortunately, sometimes we take our pets to the vet because they're just not acting right, and we're all of a sudden, out of the blue, we're facing a life-threatening diagnosis. And in all those situations, there's suddenly an internal acknowledgement that we can no longer ignore when we realize that the time behind us is now longer than the time in front of us. And those feelings inside can be so overwhelming. We may feel dread, we may feel fear. A lot of the same feelings that we go through during grief, the sadness, the guilt may be present as well. What's important to remember, and something that I'm going to repeat several times during this webinar, is that while it's normal to have those feelings, while it's normal to feel those feelings, I really encourage pet parents to remember this. Your pets are still with you today. There's going to be plenty of time for grief when that time comes. But today, they're still here. So if you can, really work on not wasting today worrying about tomorrow, and enjoy every moment that you do have with them. And I know that can be easier said than done, but it will really serve both you and your pet well. So while the information I'm going to share with you today is in part from my experience of doing this work for the past 10 years, it also really comes from living through and healing from both the anticipatory loss and pet loss of my own beloved pets. On the left there, you see my beautiful Callie girl. She was a tortie. And on the right is my beautiful Mazel tub, and he was my beautiful chocolate point Siamese. And it was really healing from Maz's loss 12 years ago that started this journey for me. Maz was with me for about 17 years, and he shared so much life in that time. Grad school, buying a business, selling a business, the end of a long-term relationship, and unfortunately, the loss of both my dad and mom in a short period. When I had him, I wasn't married. I had no children. And Maz really was my fur kid. He was my best friend. He was definitely my wisest teacher. And I used to call him my furry soulmate. So when he was diagnosed with cancer at 17, I was determined to do everything I could to help him. But after spending about $10,000 in a 3-month period and going through surgery and chemo and other treatments, Maz did lose his battle to lymphoma. What I realize now is that not only did I lose Maz, but I also lost those last 3 months before he passed. I was so absorbed with trying to save him that I forgot the most important thing, taking that time just to spend with him and to spend loving him. So when my beloved Callie started facing a lot of the diseases that senior cats get, she had anemia, she had kidney disease, I was determined to do things differently. There wasn't as many, so I made sure there wasn't as many hospitalizations and more home treatments. I made sure there were less medications and more time spent loving her. And when that time came, I did have a vet come to the house because Callie hated being in the car and she hated going to the vet. And I didn't want that to be her last memory. And while it didn't go the way I had hoped for, exactly, things kind of progressed quicker than we thought I would, I can look back now and I remember with more peace Callie's passing than I had to deal with than when Maz passed. And it's really because of what I've gone through and what I've learned that's made me want to help others. As I mentioned, I've been doing this work 10 years now. My background was in psychology, but more related to businesses. So I went back after I lost Maz and healed from the loss and got trained and certified in PetLoss. I now help people. I work with people individually. I work with people in groups, although with our situation now, I do most of the work virtually. I also do individual sessions by telephone, but I do virtual groups. I also work with veterinary practices and animal care facilities so that they can help their clients during this difficult time. It's really my goal to share my experiences and my support so that others don't have to go through what I did. And more importantly, that they don't have to go through it alone. What I want to do today with you is I want to give you information, want to give you some strategies and tips and support so that if you're dealing with a difficult end of life situation now, or if you're caring for an aging pet, you can make that time as meaningful and as loving as possible. I'm going to start out by talking about suggestions for dealing with your visits to the vet. And again, I know things are different now. Hopefully they'll get back to normal soon in terms of seeing the vet and talking to the vet, but a lot of this information still applies. And I want to start out by saying that getting a diagnosis of a life-threatening illness for our pets is incredibly difficult. And there really is that initial period where we're just trying to make sense of it all. It's almost like we're caught in the middle of a tornado and we don't even know what end is up. I strongly recommend that when you either go see your vet or if you're going to talk to your vet by telephone, to have a friend or family member either there or on the call with you. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it really is nice to have that emotional support. But more importantly, like we talked about, when we're in the middle of this, it's easy to be in a sense of denial or struggling to come to terms with the diagnosis. And having somebody with you can be so helpful because they can kind of be the recorders, listening to the information that the vet is saying, being able to ask questions, helping you to be able to absorb the information and walk alongside you and guide you during this time. I also recommend that before any visits, before any phone calls, you write down any questions that you have. And before you leave the office or before you hang up that phone call, look at your list and make sure all your questions are answered. And besides the questions that may have to do with the disease or the treatment that you're dealing with, I recommend questions that are like the ones on the slide. So talk to your vet. Ask them, when is the best time to reach you? How should I reach you? Or telephone better than email or vice versa? What about if you're not available and I need to talk to you? Who do I talk to? What do I do in case of emergency? Asking these kind of questions is going to make you feel that much more secure, like you feel like you can handle things just a little bit better. This second thing can be difficult to think about, but it's something that I so wish I did with Maze, and I think it's so important, and that's making plans ahead of time. And think about it. As we get older, even though we don't like it, we're often faced with thinking about end-of-life decisions, thinking about life insurance, writing a will, where we want to and how we want to be handled when we pass. It's uncomfortable. We may not want to do it, but there's also a comfort in knowing that, okay, it's done. I could put it away, and at least the people who care about me know what's important to me and know what I want. So why not consider the same thing with our pets? Either, if not before they're at that critical stage, then definitely shortly after the diagnosis. And listen, I say this from the experience of a pet mom who didn't do that and was faced with making incredibly difficult decisions at a very emotional time. The benefits are enormous when it comes to you and your pet. So what kind of decisions are we talking about? We may start out thinking about what are the few of the changes in your pet that you would have to see that would make you think, you know what, maybe the end of time was coming closer, or it may even be imminent. There's a couple of tools that you can use to help in that, and we're going to go over those. One is the quality of life scale, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And there are other end-of-life decisions too that we're going to talk about shortly. The point is this: as difficult as those decisions are, the positive part is that once those decisions are made, you write them down, you put them away until that time is there. It's just so much better than having to make decisions, end-of-life decisions, aftercare decisions, during an emergency situation. And that's something I was faced with at that time. So I talked about the quality of life scale. The quality of life scale was developed by Dr. Alice Villalobos. She is a world-renowned veterinary oncologist. I believe she actually retired this year and she's available only for consultations now. But her goal has always been to provide the best quality of life for the pets rather than quantity of life. In my eyes, the beauty of this scale is that it allows pet parents to view their pet's quality of life objectively rather than emotionally and subjectively, which we tend to do. What it has you do is it has you rate these 6 criteria that you see here. So looking at a couple of them: hunger, is your pet eating? Are they eating enough? Mobility, is your pet able to get around on their own? Do they need you to help them? Can they get around at all? And to me, the most important one, are you having more good days than bad days with your pet? If what you do is you rate each of those criteria from 0 to 10 and you add it up, you get a number. I believe, and you could look it at hospice.com, I believe the number is 45. If your score is 45 or higher, then Dr. Villalobos says your pet still has a good quality of life. If it's less than that number, then it may be time to start thinking about euthanasia. This is a great tool to do with a family member or a friend, again, who might see things a little bit differently because they're a little bit more objective than you. I'll tell you that this scale was so incredibly helpful for me in knowing when the time was getting closer and making plans for my beloved Callie. What I decided to do was I decided to make a chart like you see here. So a few months before Callie passed, I started using the quality of life scale on a regular basis. First, I did it every couple of weeks. Eventually, I was looking at that scale every week. And toward the very end, I was probably looking at that scale every few days. The benefit for me is that I could keep track of how she was doing. It was like seeing proof of her decline. It helped me make decisions. I even shared some of the information with my vet. And listen, I want to let you know this was not easy at all. It wasn't fun, but I felt I owed it to Callie, and I wanted to do better than I had with my beloved Mazel when he passed. And so I did it in his honor. I mentioned other types of decisions that you may want to think about. What I'm talking there is thinking about what type of vet you want by your side as you approach this end of life. And listen, you may have a wonderful vet that you've used for many years, you trust them, and that's great. But it's important to know too that today there are hospice vets, and hospice vets will work with you. They'll come to your home to do an assessment, to see how your pet is doing, to help with the medications. Maybe there needs to be a change in the medication. You may also want to look at in-home vets that do euthanasia, so that if that's your choice, when that time comes, at least you know who you want to call. Because one thing I will tell you is you don't want to wait until it's time to look online for the closest in-home vet. You want to be able to call them, have a conversation with them, ask them any questions that you may have, so that you feel comfortable, again, when that time comes. The important thing to keep in mind here too is what's going to bring the most comfort to you and your beloved pet, and what's going to give you the most peace of mind. Another thing you're going to have to think about is, what am I going to do? Am I going to bury my pet? Where? Have I looked at any facilities? Or do I want to have my pet cremated or use aquamation, which is very much like cremation. It's just more of an eco-friendly type of procedure. All these decisions are really hard to think about. But trust me, from my experience of myself and so many clients that I deal with, it's a lot easier to think about it ahead of time than in times of emergency. And while you may think, well, what I'm saying now is contradictory to the comment I made at the beginning about remembering that your pet is still with you and enjoying every moment, it really isn't, because if you can think about these things ahead of time, if you make decisions, if you write them down, which I really suggest, then just put it aside, put it in a notebook, put it in a drawer, and go on living and enjoying the time you do have with your beloved pets. So how do we do this? How do we go on and enjoy the time that we do have with our pets? What do we do to make that happen? This is the pledge from the heart, and it's a tool that to me can really help us in that. It's something I wrote probably a couple of years after I lost Maz. I had just started doing this work, and I was thinking about what lessons did I want to share with people? What did Maz teach me? So I wrote this pledge from the heart. I'm going to read it to you. It says, "Dear," and you would put in your pet's name, "because you are my dearest friend and companion, and I have taken an oath to always provide you with a pain-free and joyous life. Should you be confronted with infirmity due to either old age or an incurable disease, I promise you the following. I will not allow the treatment to become harder on you than the disease or age itself. I will stay in the moment with you and enjoy what time we do have together. I will put your needs before my fear of losing you. I will remember to keep track of the quality of your life on a daily basis and be mindful of the signals you are sending me. I will be strong enough to stay by your side at the end to send your spirit off with love. I promise to honor your memory by taking the gifts you have so freely given me and by living a fulfilling life." And then you sign it. And I recommend putting it on the refrigerator, putting it on a mirror, maybe putting it in a drawer, but remembering that it's there, and maybe from time to time look at it. If you would like a copy of the Pledge from the Heart, at the end of the presentation, you'll see my contact information. Feel free to send me an email, let me know that you were at the webinar and you'd like a copy of it, and I will definitely email it to you so that you can download it and use it. Talking about caring for you and your pet, I've been saying that we really need to work about staying in each moment and enjoying each moment we have with our pets and doing the best we can so we can take the best care of our pets. How do we do that, though? Well, you see, the first thing there is really enjoying each moment, staying in the moment. Bringing yourself back so that if you start obsessing and worrying about what the future's going to hold, you bring yourself back. And the best way to do that is just to look in your pet's eye. And you're going to see that all they care about is today with you and spending the time with you. You also see on there going on special adventures. You may have heard about people making bucket lists and people making bucket lists for their pets as well. Think about doing those kind of things. Does your dog love to go in the car on rides? Take those special rides. Or do they like to go on walks or hikes? If it gets to a point where your dog can't walk as well, think about getting one of those carriages for them. They have all kinds of contraptions now. Think about offering your pet those special treats that they love, the special toys that they love. Think about maybe taking some special pictures together. It could be sitting in the sun together, just brushing them with a special brush that they like, and talk to your pet. Let them know how you're feeling. Look in their eyes and talk to them. Even let them know that you're scared. Let them know how much you love them and that you promise you're going to make the best decisions for them. Some more resources here. We talked about the in-home vets, the hospice vets. Again, I really suggest developing a relationship with the vet before that time comes. I actually suggest when it comes to in-home euthanasia vets that you have two that you like, because you don't know. I will tell you, Callie passed July 4th weekend. So the one I wanted was unable to come because they were away. Luckily, we found another one. So have a backup plan. Brighthaven, Animal Hospice. There are animal hospice organizations out there now. Brighthaven is the one I'm most familiar with. Gail Pope developed this organization years ago. She has a ton of experience dealing with end-of-life pets. She's written a couple of books. She does telephone consultations. Really good idea, something to think about. A super important point that I want to stress, and I'm going to mention it a couple of times as we continue on with this webinar, is the point to realize that you are not alone. You don't have to go through this time alone. Today, there are others that understand. There are others that are out there to support you. And I always go back to my experience with Mazel, because it would have made such a huge difference to me if I had a professional pet loss specialist or pet specialist who I could talk to. Somebody with a compassionate ear and heart to listen to me, not to judge me, to allow me to make the decisions I needed to make, to bounce things off of and just walk alongside me as I navigated Maz's end of life. Those resources are out there now so that you don't have to do it alone. There are, even though I would like to see more, there are many pet loss specialists and groups out there to support you. And I suggest that you take advantage of them, not only when you lose your pet, but now. Reach out to somebody at this challenging time if you need that support. This is one of my favorite people, the Dalai Lama. I think he's got incredible sayings and books out there. And this saying, I think, is really important for those of us who are going through this experience. And it's this: in dealing with those who are undergoing great suffering, if you feel burnout setting in, if you feel demoralized or exhausted, it's best for the sake of everyone to withdraw and restore yourself. The point is to have a long-term perspective. I'm going to repeat that. It's best for the sake of everyone to withdraw and restore yourself. It is so true that being end-of-life caregiving is exhausting. And if you feel yourself starting to burn out, if you get to that point where you're like, I don't know how much more I can do this, you're not going to be doing your pet or yourself any good. There is a lot of truth to that saying. When you get on the airplane and before you take off, what do they tell you? They tell you that if the cabin loses pressure, put the mask on yourself before helping somebody else. That is so true. So how do we take care of ourselves? And what does that mean? And you see a few things on the screen here, and you may say, oh, sure, yeah, I'll do that. Or you may say, geez, I don't have time to do that. I've got a dog I've got to give medicine to every few hours, and I've got to worry about my dog eating. I can't worry about me eating. Well, let me tell you a little story. When Maz was sick and he needed help getting to the litter box, he needed help eating, and he was on several medications. I spent so much time focusing on him and worrying about him, making sure he was sleeping okay, that I wasn't taking care of myself. And I wound up getting walking pneumonia. And that's the last thing that you need to have happen is, I got sick, I could barely take care of me, and then I had to take care of him as well as dealing with all the emotional components. So find some time. Even if you're not sleeping as many hours, make sure you at least get a little bit of sleep. Make sure you kind of graze on food, healthy food during the day. It says do something pleasurable. And you can either, again, do that with your pet, the bucket list, or maybe have a friend come over and have lunch outside, all of you. In human hospice, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but there's a term called respite care. And basically, respite care people come in to allow the families time to go do errands, to go out to dinner. The same can apply for us. If you've got a good friend or family member, allow them to come in just for an hour so you can do an errand or two. If your pet really likes them and they know how to handle medications, let them come in to do that so you can go have a quick dinner with your significant other. It's so important, and it's going to benefit both of you. Again, to me, the most important one on here is to ask for support and to realize that you don't have to go through this alone. There are different types of support. So again, we have friends and family. Let them, whether it be respite care, let them help you with, or perhaps it's having time to just sit and talk with them. You see on their written resources. One thing I'm really going to suggest to you is stay away from Dr. Google. Google, yes, it has information, but I really believe with health-related things, it usually scares you more than anything else. If you feel like you need some extra information about the disease that your pet's dealing with, talk to your vet, call your practice and say, I want to learn more. Can you recommend something I can read about this? And then again, there's support groups, there's counselors. I want to also mention there are animal chaplains who will say prayers for your pet. They will work with you when that time comes if you want to do a pet memorial. Look, PetLoss, this anticipatory grief, it's such a disenfranchised type of thing. It's so important that you don't have to do this by yourself. Healing comes as you take care of yourself. So I really recommend that you think about that strongly as you go through all of that. Unfortunately, that day may come when we have to say so long to our pets, and it's so hard. One thing that I get asked a lot is, how do I know? Should I even get another pet? When should I get another pet? How do I know if it's right? And I will tell you that there's no one answer for everybody. You'll never find two people, even two people who have lost the same pet, who are going to grieve or heal in the same way. It's important to be mindful of what you're thinking and what you're feeling. If you think that getting another pet is going to take away your pain, I want to tell you you're wrong. You can never replace the love you have. But if you feel that your heart's big enough and that you can bring in somebody else, if you feel like you've allowed yourself to grieve and that you're in that healing process, then it may be time where you can consider getting another pet. You also want to think about other family members, like we've been talking about. No two people are going to go through this in the same way. My recommendation is that you give precedence to the people who are having the harder time and allow them to be ready. The last thing you want is to bring in a pet and maybe have a resentful significant other who can't love that pet or constantly reminds you that they weren't ready. You also want to think about, do I have the time? It really is okay to take some time for yourself. It really is okay to, I've had many clients, for instance, who have told me, I haven't traveled for 2 years. I want to go away with my husband. I'm so behind in doing errands. I want to take the time. That's okay. It's okay to be selfish and take that time. You've just spent so much emotional and time taking care of your beloved pet. It's okay to take the time for you now. But you also want to think about, do I have the time to care for another pet? Think about and remember what it was like having a puppy or a kitten in the house. It's pretty time consuming. Or if you're going to get a senior dog or cat or other animal, that pet may take more time too if they're seniors. And then you want to think about your existing pets if you have them. How are they around other animals? Would they be more comfortable with you just spoiling them and giving them all the attention for a while? The one thing it's just my personal feeling, is that saying, adopt, don't shop. The Pasadena Humane Society is an amazing organization. I've known them for many years. They do an amazing job in helping you to find the perfect pet for you. So when that time comes, it's a great organization to work with. I always like to close with a final thought. And this final thought is one of my favorites. It's a quote from Suzanne Clothier. Comes from a book called Bones. Suzanne is an animal trainer. She's written a couple of books, but I think this quote really says it all. And it's this: there is a cycle of love and death that shapes the lives of those who travel in the company of animals. It is a cycle unlike any other. To those who have never lived through its turnings or walked its rocky path before, our willingness to give our hearts with full knowledge that they will be broken seems incomprehensible. Only we know how small a price we pay for what we receive. Our grief, no matter how powerful it may be, is an insufficient measure of the joy we have been given. And I think for any of us who have loved and lived with a pet, it's just what it is. It's an amazing experience. The end can be horribly painful, but by putting things in place, it can be easier and more peaceful. And we deserve it, and their memories deserve that. This is my contact information. As I say, I do offer virtual support groups, PetLoss and Anticipatory Loss. I offer individual sessions either virtually or through telephone. I also do speaking engagements with dog clubs, cat clubs, webinars. I deal with veterinary practices, animal care organizations. As I said, if there's anything on this webinar or presentation you'd like a copy of, the quality of life scale, the pledge from the heart, the chart that I made, don't hesitate to reach out. Send me an email at the info@petlosspartners.com. Let me know you were at the webinar, and I'll be sure and send it along to you. If you also go to the website, petlosspartners.com, you'll see on the right-hand side, you can click the registration link for the groups there. So thank you for your time. I hope this information has been helpful. Sarah?
Hi there, hi everyone. Thank you, Sandra. That was such a powerful presentation. And I do want to remind everyone before we get started with the Q&A, Sandra will join us in just a moment on video, but I do want to remind everyone that you will be receiving a link to this webinar recording tomorrow afternoon in an email. So anyone who registered, whether you were able to attend or not, will be receiving that email, so you can watch this again and get as much information as you need, or rewatch some of the slides. Sandra, I think our biggest question that we had was people wanted the quality of life chart. And so I know it's included obviously in this webinar recording, but we'll figure out if there's a way that we can include it in the email tomorrow, maybe as a PDF, as a reference. So Sandra, do you want to join us on?
Sure.
And I do have to apologize. As you know, many of us are working from home these days, and so I live on a very busy street, and I just realized the gardeners have arrived, and so I apologize if there's a lot of background noise. I will keep myself as muted as possible. So Sandra, one question that we got that came up actually a number of times, and you did address it in the presentation, but people were wondering, you know, sort of this appropriate level or length of grief. There are people who've been grieving for many years and that it stopped them from moving forward with getting a new pet. Do you have any thoughts on the grieving process?
Yeah, and like I said, you're not going to find two people ever that'll grieve in exactly the same way. I do believe that it's so important, and listen, our society is horrible with grief in general, and pet loss, while it's better, is still really disenfranchised. That being said, there is support out there, and I really recommend you just allowing yourself to say, this was an important soul in my life. These feelings I'm having are really valid. So reach out to a chat room, a group, a counselor, because by doing that, you are going to be able to begin the healing process. And there's no end to grief, right? I mean, I lost Maz 12 years ago. I still miss him. His birthdays are hard. His anniversaries are hard. But I do have now, you know, even though I lost Moss and Callie, I do have two little cats that are running around here as crazy as ever, and I love them. When to bring in another pet, that'll be your decision too. It'll be different. I do recommend not doing it right away, allowing yourself some time to work through your grief. But I have a lot of clients who have gotten another pet and still come to the group and still have the sessions. It really is about, again, I'll say, not looking for that replacement, because there never will be a replacement. But getting to that point in your heart where you're like, my heart's starting to heal. I could open it up a little more. I could allow another soul to come into my heart and my life. So that's what I'd say for that.
One person is asking how to respond to a friend or family member who says, how about you get another pet, right? Or it's time to get another pet. How would you respond to that if you're really not feeling ready?
Yeah, and I think there's nice ways to deal with that. You know, you start out nice, you may have to get a little bit stronger if they still continue on with this, but I would just say, you know, wow, I really thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. Thank you for wanting to help and care about me. Right now, I don't think it's time. I don't think I'm ready, but I will consider it at a point, and I really need you just to trust me and respect the fact that I'm not ready now. So that's how I would start out. If they continue on, I hate to say this, but sometimes we have to stay away from people who aren't the best for us, and that's like in an extreme, just for a while, you know. But again, I would let the person know, again, I'm working through this, you know. You could even say I'm reading some books, I'm seeing it, going to a group. Now's not the time for me. You can even use the excuse, I don't have the time for another pet in my life. When I do, I'll definitely bring one in.
Great advice. Great advice. Another question we have is about what to expect during the process of euthanasia using an at-home vet. There are people who are new to that concept, and they just wanted to get a little more information about your experience with that.
Yeah, and so for me, and again, it's a very personal decision. One thing I always recommend is I recommend interviewing 2 or 3. And when I say interviewing them, first of all, it's not like, well, what does it cost? You know, when can you come? Although you do want to ask, how much notice do I need to give you? But you want to kind of talk to them and see if you connect. You know, some people just don't mesh very well. See how comfortable you are around them. Ask them some questions. Ask them what the procedure is, what they do, and see how comfortable they are answering you. Let them know your fears. See how they respond to that. For me, like I said, with Callie, she just went ballistic in the car, and I wasn't about to put her through that at the very end. Sometimes people have other pets, and the one pet is really close to the pet that's sick, and they want them to have a chance to say goodbye. So those are all things to consider. You can Google. I know Lap of Love is a big organization that has in-home euthanasia vets in a lot of different states. So you can go online and Google them and let them know, I just want to talk to the vet. And they may say, well, we can answer your questions, because they do have an answer in line. Say, no, I really want to talk to the vet.
Fantastic. That's a great resource. So Google is your friend in this case if you're looking for a veterinarian who do at-home.
You know, you could also talk to your own vet. Sometimes I didn't know this. I didn't know that my vet would have come to the house. So I would also suggest talking to your vet and saying, do you come to the home? Or if not, can you recommend somebody? So that would probably be my first resource, actually. I wish if I had known, I would have had my vet. I just didn't know to ask.
Right, and it seems like with the options there that you would need to consider, you know, if you would want the pet to die in your home, their comfort level, your comfort level, and all of those things. Which is why this webinar is so important, because it starts that conversation, and it starts helping people sort of think about those decisions. One question we had was about a person who has a problem with euthanasia. Are there alternatives to euthanasia? What do you think about letting my pet pass away naturally at home?
Yeah, so here's the issue. You know, a lot of us have seen movies and where the pets just, you know, lay there and they take their last breath in their pet parents' arms. And occasionally that does happen. Most times not, though. The body sometimes in the dying process does some things that can be somewhat disturbing to see. Sometimes something happens and it can be very painful, and it can be very painful for a pet to struggle for that last breath. So I'm not a big proponent of that unless, and this is the big caveat to it, you work with a hospice vet or a hospice organization or your own vet and say, this is what I want to do. What do we need to put in place to make this happen? but please don't do it just on your own. Don't think you know your pet and you know what to do. There's been a lot of hard situations that I've heard from people who have done that and really regret it. It can be done. Just have a professional work with you.
Sandra, I know you and I, before we started broadcasting, we're talking about some of the experiences people may have had who are now adults, but as children, they might have had the experience of losing a pet, but not being part of that process, in the sense that they didn't know that their pet had been euthanized or was no longer with them, and they would come home from school and the pet is simply not there. Do you have any suggestions on how to talk to children about the terminal illness of their pet, or preparing them for the loss of their pet?
Yeah, and I want to start out by saying that kids are pretty smart people, and sometimes we just don't give them credit for understanding as much as they do, and they can see a lot of what we see too. There are guidelines, there are books, and I have some things I'd be glad to send to you with some guidelines based on age, and there are appropriate ways of talking to children. I always suggest that when you're talking about end of life with a young child, you never want to, for instance, use the term put to sleep, because young kids take things literally. So to them, put to sleep, does that mean if I go to sleep one day, I'm not going to wake up either? So you've got to be careful. What I do recommend is, your child. Talking to your child in an age-appropriate way, even if you happen to look at the guidelines, they are just that, just guidelines. And talking to your spouse and thinking about what do you think they can handle. Starting that conversation and see where they take it. So you may want to say something like, Fluffy's been really having a hard time and he's in more and more pain and we don't want him to suffer, right? And they'd say, right. So, we may have to take him to the vet, and the vet may say, it's time to, and you can, again, whatever term you want to use. If you're somewhat religious, you can even say it's time to go be with God, if that's what you want to say. And let them see what they say. Let them cry. It's perfectly normal. It's sad. Let them ask those questions and they'll help you. The one thing we talked about it, Sarah, you never, ever, ever want to do is don't think you're protecting your child and the child goes off to school or for a weekend with grandma and grandpa and you take the pet then and euthanize them. And I told this long story short. I had a woman in her 40s who came to me for a recent loss, and within 5 minutes of our session was talking about a dog she lost when she was 12 because her mom did that. Her mom, while she was at school, had the dog euthanized. And here it is, again, 30 years later, and she's still upset about that. So trust your instincts, trust that kids, again, are pretty smart people, and allow them to go through this time with you.
Thank you, Sandra. We had another question about rebuilding trust with veterinarians. We've had a number of people say they've had really traumatic experiences with getting the news about a diagnosis, or feeling like they got misguided or misinformation. Do you have any suggestions for working through that, knowing that you need the advice of a veterinarian and sort of rebuilding that trust?
Sure. And listen, they're just like any other doctor. There are good doctors, and some doctors, unfortunately, are not that good. Some doctors, just like human doctors, have a better, so to speak, bedside manner. And I think it's really important as you go through this process, first of all, when I was talking about the questions to ask, to be really honest with your vet and let them know all the way along what you need. If you have a problem during any part of that process, talk to them and let them know that. During that process, if you're not comfortable with them, you may want to go to another vet. But if you're talking about, okay, I've had a really bad experience with this vet, one thing I do want to say, and I recommend this with human doctors as well as with veterinarians, it really is important to take the time after the sadness or the anger has subsided a bit and think about calling them and saying, you know, I have a lot of questions. I'm really uncomfortable. I'd like to pay for a 30-minute session just to talk to you, you know, or maybe write a letter to them to get all that out. In terms of if you definitely don't want to go to that same vet, another thing I would recommend is when you start out with a new vet, tell them about the experience you've had. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying, I lost Fluffy, I'm using that name for whatever reason. If I lost Fluffy 3 years ago, it was a really horrible time. I felt like the doctor wasn't able to communicate with me. He wasn't there when I asked questions. He wasn't, whatever it may be. I don't want that to be this experience. Here's what I need from you. Are you able to do that? And I think you have to be really honest.
Yeah, it seems like sort of that, you know, advice that we give ourselves about good communication can help us manage expectations, right, across the board.
Yes.
And that's really what it's about. Our final question, Sandra, which I thought was perfect because I think it is a great reminder of the services that you offer through PetLoss Partners, was about how you can become certified to be a pet loss specialist.
Sure. And so actually we do have a pet loss specialist certification course. It is online. It's partly webinars, partly PDFs and reading materials that you would get. It's 10 weeks. It is, for those in the veterinary field, it is RACE accredited. And really, what I like to say about the course is this. Our course really allows you, it gives you the nuts and bolts. It lets you know how to deal with people who are just wrapped in guilt, or how to deal with children, how to deal with seniors, how to run a support group. It's a very practical course. We just actually started this round, so our next course will be starting September 13th. Again, if you email me at that address, I'll definitely send you the information. We do take deposits, so we have actually a couple of people signed up already for our September course. But please feel free to call me or email me, and I'd be glad to give you the information about that.
I know that a lot of my colleagues in the human or animal service world would probably be very interested. So we're very excited that that's something you're offering. We just want to remind everyone that tomorrow you'll receive an email with a link to this webinar recording. And we want to thank you again, Sandra, so much for this really informative, very powerful, and very helpful. We've got so many thanks coming in through the chat. So people really appreciate what you've been able to provide them.
Sure, and again, if anybody has any other questions that we didn't get a chance to address and you want to email me, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you at the next Pasadena Humane webinar, and you can check out all our webinars and events at pasadenahumane.org. Thank you, Sandra, so much. I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.